All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Bryan and I are here with David Sandys. He is the Director of Technical Marketing over at Digi-Key Electronics, and he has quite an interest in making. So we are going to have a fun discussion today. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Why don't you kick us off by telling us not only about your journey to Digi-Key, but even your journey to your love of making?
Oh boy, this can get really dangerous.
We could be here for a while.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've known David for a while. Yeah, so,
it all started way back when. No, I will tell you actually the first and second time where I started falling in love with making, and it's way back when. I mean, you got to realize I am old, and I'm comfortable with saying that. I've been around for a long, long time. But you know, when I started in 1977, that tells you how old I am. I got my first computer, a Commodore VIC-20. And I don't know if you remember this, but the Commodore VIC-20 was basically hooked up to a TV screen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When you turned it on, you had like 3,152 bytes of information, like usable space when you turned it on. And I remember the first time my parents looking at it, they go, "Is that a lot?" I go, "I'll never run out of that. I mean, that's infinite amount of space, right?" And it's funny because I started right then with BASIC, right? That's what you used on the Commodore VIC-20. And as soon as I could see that I could sit here and you know, print one character at a time, change the color of each character, you know, do all these interactive elements with it, I was going, oh, wow, this is really, really cool. And that really started me on my journey. Fast forward just a couple years, really, and I started thinking about what are things that I can do? How can I get involved in, you know, using my hands to be creative? And so at the time, again, dating myself in high school, color organs were a big thing. And I was thinking, could I make my own color organ? What would that look like? Now I realize there's no internet. I know nothing about electricity. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, right? So I take a telegraph key. I build a box. I put in, you know, 5 full-size light bulbs in it, all different colors, right? I take telegraph keys and I wire it, not so that the switch is breaking the connection, the connectivity, but across the connectivity. So what happens is as soon as I press the first switch, I blow all the circuits in the house, right? I mean, everything went dark. And, you know, I started going, okay, so that's not the right approach. I know that, right? But that, I mean, that's really where it all starts from. It all starts from just trying and having that passion to get involved. And so, you know, fast forward a long time, I've been doing that. And of course, I then turned it into a Heathkit activity with, you know, proper channels, proper separation for bass, treble, and mids, and what have you. It was very cool. I loved doing those types of things. First soldering activity way back when, before I even took any electronics classes or anything. And it stoked that fire within me. And I'd say ever since then, I've been that kind of person who, you know, I'm not going to pay someone to fix the ice machine in my fridge or to fix the switch in my microwave. I can do that, right? So, and the way I've always looked at things is they're already broken. It is not working. I'm not in there to make it better. And that's, you know, that's a little bit difference between the making and engineering side. Engineering is like, how can I make this thing better, more efficient, right? The making side is, how can I just make this work? Right. And so that's kind of what I got to. And, you know, so like I said, fast forward a little bit, I took software as my initial undergrad element. And I did do software programming for HP for a couple of years. Then I went to graduate school. But then I went to AMD, and AMD really changed my life because at that time we had these wonderful microcontrollers and microprocessors that were 32-bit RISC. And I was a technical marketing engineer, a product marketing engineer. You know, I supported all those products, and that really got my interest in the embedded side. You know, and so I've been playing around with stuff ever since. I mean, you know, I continually try and find things that I can do.
Okay, so I was a really curious kid too, right? I was the same way, pulling things apart, or, you know, sometimes that weren't supposed to be pulled apart, but pulling things apart. But how important is like curiosity in this, right? Because I always feel like that is like one of the biggest things, like how curious you are on how to, whether it's see how it works or make something. It's so much about curiosity.
It's about curiosity. It's about learning. And it's about, I mean, I think for me, it's a lot of it is about innovation. And you know, if you take a look at what's happened over the years, it's amazing. You know, I talked a little bit about AMD way back when, but you know, when when you wanted to start a 32-bit design in those days, you needed an in-circuit emulator because, candidly, you had to set your own memory up. So there's no DRAM controller that's already set up. You're creating your own DRAM controller. So you need a couple $100,000 in-circuit emulator. You need $5,000 for a development board, $2,500 for every seat for your IDE, right? Now, today, all of that can be had for less than 20 bucks, right? So if you think about that exact environment where things were and how this has enabled so many people to get into making. And by the way, you know, it's funny because you think about what is the difference between a maker and an engineer. And I actually don't know whether you can use those as mutually exclusive, and I'll tell you why. I go to a maker fair. Digi-Key loves going to maker fairs. They are the most interesting. It's like Renaissance Festival meets Dune or whatever. I mean, it's the most incredible place. If you've never gone to one, go to a maker fair. You will love it.
It's true. It's true.
But what's interesting there is that you will meet, you know, engineers who are from Tesla and Apple and Google coming through as quote unquote makers. Right? And that's because a lot of what they do on their spare time is making. And I think it's that passion to share that knowledge with other people that differentiates those types of engineers. And I'm not trying to label anyone, but the people who are interested in making, it's that element. It's the passion to not only learn, but the passion to share. And so that's why those shows are called the largest show and tell on earth. Right? Because that's exactly what it is. You show what you're doing, you tell what you're doing, you help people you know, get in touch with their inner maker, their inner innovator, and that's really kind of the whole idea of those shows. I mean, and I love them, and I really think that that's kind of one of the things that differentiates, you know, today's makers versus 10, 15 years ago.
Right. And I think that's, you know, when you talked about earlier, the difference between an engineer and a maker when it comes to even just, you know, fixing something in the home, right? I mean, there are probably different levels of engineer, right? And it wouldn't be fair for me to just group them together, you know, engineers versus makers. No. You know, I'm sure there are engineers out there who are really just, you know, down to the business. Let's just make this more efficient, like you said. Let's just figure out how to solve this problem. And that's it. You know, they're kind of there to be very technical and meticulous. So I think, you know, to kind of smash that, my original thought was, you know, where's the difference between the engineer and the maker? But it wouldn't be fair to say that because there are probably different levels.
And I think there's the same thing on makers, right? There's some makers who have commercial aspirations.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And they kind of fall into the camp then of engineer. Now, they may not have the technical training, or they do have the technical training. They started off creating a machine that cools a beer when they drive home, right? They can send a text and it sets the temperature down and what have you, and they love doing that. But then the next design that they created is something that's a little bit more unique and something that they can be passionate about. They think has commercial viability. And all of a sudden, they're a startup. And so it's really that spectrum. And it's so interesting to look at that spectrum because it's like, for me, that starts way back when in the STEM days, right? In you know, grade school, whatever, middle school, whatever you want to call it, right? Through the education space in the EDU space in the universities. And you know, I have a good friend whose son is a dentist and needed something done, and so he made it with a 3D printer, right? And he's never done 3D printing before.
Right.
You know, he's never done electronics before, and yet he created a whole kit that, you know, enabled to the specific functions that he was looking for. And so I think that that's what you kind of get is you have this whole spectrum, and you really can't classify anyone as just a maker or just an engineer or what have you. I mean, you're right. There are some engineers that are, you know, that's what they want to do is their day job, and that's it. And there's probably some makers that never want to take anything to market. But it's really neat to look at the whole spectrum.
Right.
And you mentioned this earlier, right? Things have gotten so inexpensive where they're accessible to everyone. So, you know, we talked about 3D printing. What are some of the other things out there that you feel that are really now accessible to people in order to help their making?
Yeah, there's so much. How much time do we have?
As much time as you want, David.
Yeah, next time you're going to have to just book an 8-hour day with you.
Sorry. Well, you know, what's interesting when you ask that question, Bryan, is my mind initially goes obviously to Arduino and Raspberry Pi, right? Yeah. Everyone loves these platforms. It's that ubiquitous element and everything else that has enabled people to do things. But times have changed so much in the last year and a half. I actually have a little show and tell piece, all right? Do you know what this is? And you can see the little Pi logo. Sorry, it's not focusing. There we go. Right? This is the RP2040 Pico.
Okay.
And it was so interesting last year when Raspberry Pi introduced the RP2040 because that's their first microcontroller. Up until that time, every Raspberry Pi has been a single board computer. It's a Linux-based platform. You can program it with Python. It's got the beautiful 40-pin header everyone loves, and you can do so many things with it. No doubt, the Raspberry Pi is an amazing platform. This is kind of like a game changer because all of a sudden you start seeing, for the first time in years, everyone developing 2040 boards. You've got Adafruit, SparkFun, Pimoroni, you name it, whoever they are, they're creating 2040 platforms. And what's so different between this and the original Arduino is because now that you've got these 32-bit architectures, you can program all of them in Python. CircuitPython is a big one, right, from Adafruit. So what's so cool about that is you don't have to look for these board managers in Arduino. I love the Arduino IDE. Please don't get mad at me, Team Arduino. Okay? I love it. But what's so cool about these things is that now they enumerate as just a thumb drive. And all you do is you drag your file over, it compiles and runs it basically on runtime, and you automatically have a complete platform with just programming it in Python. So you don't have to deal with the board manager. You don't have to deal with the compilation and then download. You do have to kind of create it and then drag it over, but it's a much easier interface. So I think that on the idea of Python has really changed a lot of what making has happened. There's a couple other things as well. One thing that I would really look at that I think is very neat as well is the introduction of some of these ecosystems. And so SparkFun and Adafruit both have got these ecosystems that are I2C based. Quick is on one of them. That's the SparkFun element. StemmaQT is Adafruit. And these are those little black connectors, the JST connectors on the end of these boards. What makes that so cool is that you can daisy chain them. So if you think about trying to get a design going, rapid prototyping, I can just take, a temp sensor, an accelerometer, or what have you, put it after my microcontroller and call it a day. So cool. Those ecosystems are really neat. And probably one of the best ecosystems is Adafruit Feather, right? So I don't know if you've played around with the Feather, but there are, I don't know, 300 feather wings, 200 at least feather wings that can go on top of this. You can add all types of connectivity. This is a Cortex M4 version, the M4 Express, and just by having those elements, it's really neat. So again, I guess what I would say is this: some of the big changes. Definitely Python. I love that. CircuitPython, by the way, has almost 300 boards that support it. It's not just from Adafruit. It's all over the place. Very cool architecture. And then I would say to me, I'm going to go one step up a little bit, which is, I hope you're okay, which is more towards the serious engineer and the startup. And I think that there's one thing that's a huge differentiator that has happened in the last year that is not getting the types of visibility I think it should, and that's the SparkFun a la carte system. And if you've never taken a look at this, the a la carte system is basically like Chipotle for electronics, right? You can pick your microcontroller like an ESP32 or an STM32. You can pick your IOs that you want. Do I want to have an accelerometer? Do I want to have an SD card, micro SD reader? How do I want it powered? Do I want it battery powered, solar powered, line powered, you name it? And just click build it, and they will design and build the board for you. So if you think about people who are more software engineers that don't have the time or don't have the knowledge to be able to create their own platform, they can get a rapid prototype in a matter of a couple weeks. And you don't have to respin it. You don't have to worry about debugging. All those other things that happen. So I just think that that's kind of a really neat platform. And the last thing I'll say, so I went on the very high end. I'm going to go on the very low end. All right. Because I do think this is really important. We do a lot of things with microbit. So this is a microbit-based coaster, and it's nothing to it. I mean, it literally, does a rainbow pattern. It's, it changes the pattern on it, what have you. It's based off of, it's got 3D printing elements to it because we 3D print the enclosure. It's just got a microbit on it. Why is this so critical on the low end? And the reason why it's so critical in the STEM environment, get people interested in making at the very young age, is because you can program it with MakeCode. right? So you can program this platform with MakeCode in a block kind of format, and then with one click, switch it over to Java, which is really cool, right?
Right.
And not only that, but if you want to go to the next level, Adafruit makes a board that is pin compatible called the Clue. It's actually got a display on it. And I know I'm showing all these products. It's not to sell them. It's so people kind of understand. I hope that's okay, by the way.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
absolutely. Actually, what I love about what you're doing is you're showing like the diversity of like from the simplest to more complicated things, right? Which actually just shows the diversity of makers, right? And where they are in sort of the build process. I love it.
Yeah, so what's great about this Clue platform is you can see it keeps the same edge connector. So any of those peripherals that you have, like the Zip Halo, will work with it, right? So that's not a problem. But what's really cool is all of everything that's built into this platform. So this is NRF 5280 840 based. So it's got Bluetooth on it, right? But what's so cool is all of the sensors that are on it. Light sensor, temp sensor, accelerometer, you name it, all on one little platform in a very inexpensive platform. So, I mean, I think that's the type of thing that I really like and I enjoy is that whole spectrum. You can start at that very low end and go all the way up to high end 32-bit with, some of these, even this is a Raspberry Pi 2.0 wireless platform. And so it's got Wi-Fi, new updated Wi-Fi, quad core processor. I mean, very cool stuff. So anyway, that's my show and tell. I'm done with it.
So, I think the thing you're pointing out, right, is the fact that it's becoming easier and easier. So you don't have to have these conversion pieces. And I'm going to go back to where you started with BASIC, right? When you started programming in BASIC and then over sudden things became very DOS based, you had to compile your BASIC for DOS, and then DOS got changed into sort of these I don't know, these visual platforms, right? Like these OSs that were visual. And it's sort of the same evolution, right? You had these harder pieces. So you had to understand a bit more about how the components work together. And now it's becoming, easier for everyone, the end user or the maker or the engineer who's actually building something.
Right. And the thing that's so critical about today is that it's everything. It's the ecosystem around everything. And you can go to GitHub and find files for just about anything you want. We have a website, maker.io. You can go to Instructables. There's all these great sites that are out there to help you piggyback off of learning. And I should say, this is the one thing that really differentiates and why I'm so passionate about this space is because I love our suppliers like ST. I love NXP. But it's a challenge for people to utilize their hardware if they've never used it before. So what the maker side of the equation does is you take someone like an Adafruit who will create these learn guides, right, or hookup guides is what SparkFun calls them, that takes people step by step. How do I utilize? So no longer am I just, it used to be, just let me get to blink. I just want to see a light or hello world, right? Let's go even back further, right? Let me just print hello world and let me get that working, please, right? Now it's extremely common for you to sit here and, just right off the bat, get the temperature in the room or throw it around and see how many G's you're getting, right? I mean, that's simple to do in this day and age. So think about the piggybacking, the stepping on top of that. And I think that's kind of an interesting element.
Do you think also too, I mean, now, like you mentioned, there's all these resources out there, right? When we were kids, it really wasn't like you were dependent on like knowing someone or someone. Like for me, one of my friend's dad was an engineer. So we were able to go and get access to like chunks of code or, things like that, or even just information like how to do stuff, and now with all these resources, it makes it so much easier for people to actually get into it and to build pieces. Like you said, you could go to various different sites, and get whether tutorials or chunks of code to actually develop these things.
One of the funnest things I did with my son's now an MSEE, all right? One of the funnest things I did with him is he got into vinyl records. And I have an old Technics turntable from the day, and it's followed me from house to house to house.
All right.
But we plug it in and the thing doesn't work, right? So he goes, oh, well, let's go and get a new one. I go, no, let's see what's going on. So you open it up, you trace the power, you look at what's happening. Okay, so we found out a couple things that are broken, add a switch, resolder a couple elements, boom, it works. So is it the prettiest with the switch on the side? No, it isn't. But you know what? It works.
It works.
Right?
And what's important too is you did it, right? Which there's something to say. And I think like a lot of makers, because sometimes, I make stuff and people are like, wow, I can't believe you spent that much time doing that. I actually enjoy that. Like, to me, like, it may not be the most beautiful thing, like the switch on the side to you, but to me, I enjoy that piece of it. Like, actually, I get joy and satisfaction out of like, I fixed that, or I made that work, or I built that with my hands, Hey,
Bryan, there's no problem with starting small. The first thing I printed on that 3D printer behind me, you're gonna laugh, okay? But we have this cup in our bathroom, my wife and I, and we use this cup for Q-tips. I don't know why. That's become the Q-tip cup. But the Q-tips don't fit. They're way down on the bottom, right? So the first thing I printed when I got this thing was a little riser, just to see. First of all, I've never printed anything. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to slice something. I don't know what G-code is. I mean, so I'm starting from the very beginning. Yeah, but now all of a sudden you're creating enclosures for fun stuff. I just did one for. I have this like okay, back to the color Oregon days. I have a VU meter type of thing that I created, right? And I want it to look pretty nice. So I created a nice enclosure for it. I mean, so that's, you start small. There's no step. Just take the first step to making. And once you start, you'll be on that lifelong journey.
I agree.
Would you say, David, that there are some industries that are kind of embracing the maker movement more than others? When we think about maybe IoT, or I don't know what else is out there, are there some that you're seeing rapid growth in over the years?
I think it's showing up all over the place. And I know you had Robbie on, a month or two ago, whenever it was, and Robbie's our IoT person. So I'm not going to talk about that much around IoT. Go watch that podcast. It's awesome.
Yeah, Robbie was awesome.
All right, now let's talk. I think IoT, you're absolutely right. I think there's some elements there. You look at things like Adafruit IO, right? You look about things that we have a company called Machine Chat, and I'll tell you what's so different, what's so kind of neat about some of the things that are happening in the IoT realm, especially as it relates to makers, right? One of the challenges whenever you talk about an IoT design is the data aggregation, the data transmission, the visualization. What does that all look like? And getting it up to AWS and you name it, right? Not everyone wants to put their data up on AWS, right? So there's like companies that have been created like Machine Chat, which enable you to go ahead and have that whole aggregation of data, visualization of data, running off a PC, a Mac, or I think you can do a Beagle platform, definitely a Raspberry Pi, all right? So what makes that so unique and different is that there's a lot of companies who don't want their data going all over the place. They want to do a rapid prototype. The one thing we are seeing more than anything, and we can document this, is that when students in universities, they utilize, or makers utilize, Adafruit, SparkFun type platforms, and then they go to become professional engineers inside large OEMs, they are bringing those platforms with them, right? We can see, and I can't share specific POS data, but every large company you can think of that's technology based, whether it's ones that throw up spaceships or cars or you name it, they all use Adafruit and SparkFun, by the way. Just so you know, I mean, those platforms that are quote unquote maker platforms are in there for rapid prototyping. There's no doubt about it. We see it. We see the data. So it's kind of unique. Now you ask about companies adopting it. One of the best examples, I think, is the GE First Build stuff. So I don't know if you're familiar with GE and what they did, but with First Build, they actually had a contest where they would invite people in to have a hackathon, right, around GE. And they'd have a whole warehouse full of GE, appliances, right? And so you would think about what are some of the things that, they have engineers since the very beginning at GE, right? How are these hackers going to create things that are different and unique? Well, give you some examples. So some of the things to come out of there is a pitcher that automatically self-fills when you put it in the fridge. So every time, you want a cold pitcher of water, you've got it already at the ready. That's one. Simple one, kind of neat. And number two, one that I really love. How does a garbage disposal work? You know, those things in the sink, right? If you think about it, since the beginning of time, the way we've always done it is turn on the water, turn on the garbage disposal, let it run for 30 seconds or whatever, turn off the garbage disposal, turn off the water. Well, they created an automatic one that's one button that does everything, right? Now, doesn't that, I think that makes perfect sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right? Why are we sitting here with a, and then the other one that came out of the GE first build is also turning an oven to have a separate setting, and it's Arduino based that they did here, by the way, to roast coffee beans. Right? You've already got that platform. Everyone loves coffee, you know. So those are the types of things where companies are definitely adopting it. And if you take a look at it, it's not uncommon at all for the largest companies to have maker spaces now, to spearfront that innovation inside their facility. Google has them called Google Garages, right? A lot of companies have them. And I think it's critical to the mindset of innovation, creativity, stoke the passion of your employees, give them a place to just, you know, if you think about it, almost everyone has their own mini Bell Labs, so to speak. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of companies adopt that philosophy.
Do you think also too with the companies and like having these hackathons, they're actually just overall, it seems like they're creating more creative solutions, right? And even the people coming in as makers that are coming into these companies, they're creating more creative products because they're utilizing resources a different way. Yeah,
absolutely. It's resources, it's new thought process. Looking at something and seeing it a different way, right? I mean, if you've been working in the same field for 30 years, everything looks the same. You know, everything. If you got every opportunity is a nail, if all you got is a hammer. But you know, you start thinking about all these other tools and things that they're bringing in. I wanted to mention one other thing that Nicolette kind of touched on earlier on, like IoT. I think there's other areas where the makers are kind of leading some of that forefront. Areas like machine learning, right? AI. I think RISC-V is another area. Robotics is another area. These are areas where makers are playing. They're kind of like playgrounds. As a matter of fact, that General Grievous back there, that board that's in it is called a circuit playground from Adafruit. And the whole idea is playing around with circuits, right? And so I think that's what you're finding is that these platforms that are coming out that are either, you know, companies like Edge Impulse is creating, which can be obviously on the very, very high end. It's, you know, they've got that machine learning algorithm, the TensorFlow for microcontrollers, which a lot of people are, TensorFlow Lite for microcontrollers, sorry, I forgot the word light. You know, a lot of people are adopting as well. So I think you're finding that innovation is that's kind of that spearhead comes a lot through the maker movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned robotics because you definitely that's a place you really see makers making huge strides. Also, what about, you know, and I was just thinking about this. What about, you know, voice recognition? Yeah,
that's through like machine learning is what I would say.
Right. Okay.
Right. So there's a lot of that going on, and I'm still trying to figure out what is the use cases. Like, when am I really, you know, and of course we're very close with Adafruit, you know, Lamore and Phil and the whole team over there. We love them to death. We do 3 videos with them a week. So there's, you know, Digi-Key and Adafruit are tied at the hip. They've got this thing for, you know, from ML and learning ML, and it's, you know, recognizing words like, and especially on the edge. So we're talking about microcontrollers. We're not talking about on the mainframe, on the, you know, high-end PCs. We're talking on the edge. There are challenges, right? So you can recognize the word dog and cat and what have you. I think that is you know, an interesting area where it's going to go, Brian. I think part of it as well as machine vision, right? You see a lot of facial recognition and things like that. All of those elements that are AI based, I think are going to have a huge element of growth over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, because I think we're going to see like huge growth from, you know, it's so command based now, you know, it's just, you know, where it's going to be really getting into that real AI where it's thinking based and it's going to understand and process it, you know, to some degree.
Yeah. Hey, I want to mention one thing also, by the way. You talk about robotics. So take a look at OddJ when you get a chance.
Okay.
So OddJ, I don't know if you know who he is, Jorvan Moss. So he just started with Digi-Key, but his stuff is so cool. It's not that he's a Digi-Key employee now. That's not what I'm getting at. Take a look at the stuff. It's younger people who are so interested. his platforms are mostly around TikTok. We don't even have a TikTok presence. So that's why I'm saying it's not about Digi-Key, it's about Jorvan and Jay. And you should just, for the people out there who don't realize what are some of the things, his robots that he creates have so much personality. They're kind of almost like animated, like pets and things like that, which I think are really, really cool. And I think that's another area that you're going to see a lot of makers move down that path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think of making, I don't think of some of those things that you just talked about, machine learning and AI. You know, to me, I always think of the very hands-on making. And so you've really, you're opening my eyes too, that this is kind of going past the physical and now we're making in a different sense almost.
Yeah. And Nicolette, unfortunately, I come from the electronic side, so I have blinders on. If you go to a makerspace, which is really cool, you'll see things like sewing machines. You'll see things like screen pressing. You'll see sandblasting, water jets, water jet machine. You'll see so many things that are there. I'm just giving my own little tiny vision, and because I see everything through electronics. And the reason, partially why I do that, is because I'll give you an example. When we go to maker fairs, we have this one thing. It's an augmented reality application where there's a physical skateboard that's up on a wall, right? And it's got lights on it and everything, but it's not lit. It's just up on a wall, right? And we have an AR app where people can go ahead and they can quote unquote, look through a project that's up on our website. They can order all the parts, quote unquote, get a little truck that delivers it. They scan a box. That's a physical box that's there. So everything for the first part is just an app, but then they scan, they go to augmented reality, they swipe it up. All these parts come out, they assemble all the parts. It says scan the skateboard that's up on the wall. They scan the skateboard on the wall, and it downloads code, kind of like a matrix look and then they hit a power button at the end. And the skateboard turns on and all the lights go around and do whatever. And I can't tell you how many people whose mouths just drop when they see it, right? And that's what I love, is I love that point of passion that you start seeing the people just getting engaged and just, their mind starts going. So I think lights do that, sound do that. That's part of the reason why I love the electronic side of making so much, because I think that that's kind of a very engaging touch point. It's a great way to set that beachhead and then introduce them to all the other areas of making.
Right. Well, I think one of the important things that sort of both of you were touching on, right, is it's about all these different components. Sometimes it is the hands-on, sometimes it is programming, sometimes it is the augmented reality. It's all creation of whatever you're trying to get to at whatever the end goal is, right? So if you're trying to build whatever, a General Grievous, right? If you're trying to, here's all the things I need to do that. And some of it is programming, some of it is making whatever 3D printing a part and putting it all together to create something that's whatever your vision is. So it's all connected. So it's all making and creating, and I would argue it's all getting your hands on everything, right? You're touching everything, whether it's coding or you spend some time coding. Your hands are on that keyboard, right?
And Bryan, it's also about not being scared to fail. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things. Even me, I'm still beginning on 3D printing. This is something that I just created. Okay. Times have really changed. When it used to be me handing my technology all down to my kids, now my kids are handing up their technology to me, right? So for the Super Bowl, off of one of my kid's friends, I bought he had a 4K projector, and I'm like, okay, my old one was 570, not even HD, it's like 1,000 lumens, and my kids are like, come on, can you just update that thing? And so his friend had one because he just upgraded to a laser. Long story. This is the problem. 8 hours, I'm telling you. The one thing it didn't come with is a lens cap cover, so I printed a lens cap cover, right? And that's the type of thing, is just always be looking for things where, that movie way back with the robots, right? That Disney made, which was find a need, fill a need kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And, always have that passion, keep on going. And for me personally, I would, the more, and I know as I, go out and retire, I'll probably still try and teach people how to make. I'll probably still be bringing on 10 electronics kits to a school and saying, okay, what can you do with this and why? And where would you take it to the next level? Because I think that getting people interested is what it's all about. We need that in America. So
absolutely.
Bryan, do you have any other questions for David today?
No, David. I mean, thank you for all the information. It was a fun discussion. I think the only thing is tell us where else people
Yeah,
can
what do you
find
guys have going on over at Digi-Key that
Yeah.
could help out some makers right now?
So there's a couple things happening at Digi-Key, which are kind of neat. Next year will actually be our 50th anniversary. So we started in 1973, and so just for people, again, here I go, 2 hours. The origin, not every company's got a great origin story. Digi-Key does. So Digi-Key's origin story, if you're not familiar with it, Dr. Ron Stortle got his PhD in electrical engineering, University of Minnesota, came back to Thief River Falls. He's a big ham radio advocate. He created this thing called the digital keyer to smooth out dits and dots, right, on the dashes and dots, I should say. It's dits and dots, but anyways, for Morse code type of keying. And he realized that as soon as he saturated that market with his digital keyer, he had all these parts left over. So he was that original maker. He saw a need. He wanted to create something. He created this thing, and then he had all these parts left over. So he put in ads on to sell them. So that's the origin story of Digi-Key. We're going to pay homage to that for the 50th anniversary. We just started sponsoring a webcast called Ham Radio Workbench. And George and the team over there are also makers. They create things like, they're full-time engineers, but on their part-time, they've created things like a power supply for ham radio. We now stock that part. We're also looking at recreating that digital keyer, maybe in a more fun and innovative fashion that works with a cell phone kind of thing, not necessarily ham radio based, but more today's technology. So those are things we're looking at doing. And then the other thing that's really big for us this year is we're opening up our PDCE, which is our new warehouse. I know this is very self-serving for me to talk about it, but it's 1.1 million square feet. It's 2.2 million feet under the roof of usable space. It's huge. You could fit the Empire State Building inside it diagonally. It's got 26 miles of conveyor belts inside it. Just a huge facility. And that's going to be going live this year as well. So it's been,
crazy.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool.
I can't wait to come check it out. I know I've been in the other one. It's awesome. And even there, I remember sitting with Dave Doherty and him explaining you guys made actual devices to count chips and stuff. Like you guys actually have that real maker mentality, right, in your company. Like you guys were actually creating stuff to even help with your business,
right?
Yeah. So for instance, during COVID, our engineers created a tube that's, UVC for, as germicide for it. We're getting rid of the, COVID viruses. So every tote that we have goes through this tube and gets sanitized. We've done lots of things that are like that. There are areas, and I will tell you, in the new building that even Digi-Key employees, that if they're not part of that team, are not allowed in, because there's some innovations that are there. We did something so simple last year. In those cut tapes you were talking about, we print on the back of them now, right? So when we're counting parts, we can print things like what the part number is. I mean, you can't read what they are, so how are you supposed to know, right? So part number, lot codes, manufacturing date, all of that stuff can all be printed on the back of the tape. So now, makers or engineers can see right away what are the devices without having to figure out, okay, that's, that resistor's got, orange, red, yellow. What does that mean? Let me look it up on the code, kind of thing, right? So, so kind of cool that we are definitely. You're right. We are definitely utilizing our engineers to the fullest, and it's really it's a great place to work. I mean, that you've been around Digi-Key for a long time, so I'm not asking for your endorsement. Don't get me wrong, but I come from other places. I've worked for incredible companies, no doubt. But Digi-Key's been an amazing place, and I'm just so happy to be there and be, leading the team that's kind of in this maker space, education space, startup space. That's kind of our forefront, is that next generation of customers, and I think makers play right into that.
Well, David, thank you.
That sounds exciting, David.
I know, and thank you for everything you're doing. For the community of engineers and makers.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me be a guest. I really appreciate it.